Hey, First United Methodist friends, it's Pastor Shannon here. It has been a while since my last weekly update, so I'm excited to be able to share with you some of the things that we have going on here at First United Methodist Church of Excelsior Springs. Well, we have been in the middle of a worship series on spiritual practices. And I have to tell you, I have loved being able to share some of my favorite spiritual practices with you. Lectio Divina, walking prayer, body prayer. Pastor Emily shared about praying in color. All of these are things that I have done and I have loved and valued as ways to connect with God. But of course, there are numerous ways that we can connect with God. We are barely scratching the surface on all the different spiritual practices that we can use in our life to grow deeper in our relationship with God. So I wanted to take today to share a couple of my favorite resources on spiritual practices, on spiritual discipline. And first, there are two books, and I've actually referenced these in my sermons. The first is this book, Creating a Life with God, by author Daniel Wolpert. I think that's how you say his name. But this was a book that I used in my spiritual practices class a couple of semesters ago in seminary, and it's really accessible, really easy to read. He tells a lot of stories about ways that he has used spiritual practices in his life or ways that ancient Christians have developed and navigated these spiritual practices over the years. So it's pretty short. You can probably find it on Amazon. A great simple read if you are looking to dig into more spiritual practices other than what we've been talking about in church. And the second one is a little bit of a thicker book. It's called The Spiritual Disciplines Handbook by Adele, Ahlberg, Calhoun. And what I like about this is she gives kind of some basic overviews on a ton of different spiritual practices. And each spiritual practice maybe has only just a page or two of information. So it's not really a book that I've read just straight through, but if I'm interested in finding out more about a specific spiritual practice, I'll just go to the table of contents and look it up and then head to that page. So this is one that I've also used in developing this worship series. And then finally, I want to talk about two different podcasts that I've used. So a lot of us love podcasts. We might listen to them as we're doing our drive or we're getting ready for the day. The first is one called the Pray As You Go podcast, and I'll be sure to link it below. But it uses deep breathing and meditation and scripture, daily scripture readings as a way to connect with God. And I like it because it feels like I'm also connecting with Christians around the world. And then the other podcast is one called The Examine, and it's put out by a Catholic Jesuit priest named Father James Martin. And I don't know that they're doing new episodes, but they just recycle the same ones from every 3 years based on the lectionary, based on the church calendar. But the Examine is a practice that you kind of take a look at your life, have the day that you had, the moments where you saw God, the moments where you felt that God was near, and gives you kind of a way to evaluate how your day has been. So I like to do that one in the evenings. Maybe if I'm having trouble falling asleep, this is one that I'll put on to close out my day. And then I also wanted to give a little preview on where we are headed in worship for the rest of the summer and into fall. So we have 2 more weeks on our spiritual practices worship series. Next week, we're going to talk about hospitality, and then we'll close it out on August 13th with the spiritual practice of fasting. And then we're going to move into a 3-week series just on Sabbath, which is another spiritual practice that we can use. But I feel like Sabbath is something we can all use more of in our lives as God is calling us to rest. This is especially important as we move into fall, as we get back into kind of our rhythms of school or work or whatever it may be. I think that one of the rhythms we need to add to our lives is rest and time for Sabbath. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that later this summer. And then finally, in the fall, we're going to be doing a series on tough questions or big questions. Those things that we have always wondered about God or about faith or about religion, the Bible. So this is where I need your help. If you have a tough question about God, one of those hard questions that you'd like to dive into a little bit deeper, email me and I would love to perhaps incorporate that into our worship series. So I'd love to do our best to answer these questions together. Of course, some of these questions won't have a definitive answer, but it's fun to be able to explore them with you all. Well, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you in worship on Sunday.